Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is Anthony Keoli. I'm the Regional Director for the Alaska Region Training and Technical Assistance Center. And today we're presenting the National ANA Administration for Native Americans webinar on tribal emergency management. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping on our system here, BB Collaborate. Basically, we're just going to mainly be using the chat box if you have any questions. We have several presenters today, so I'll be taking a couple of questions after each presentation and then moving on to the next presentation. And if we have time at the end, we'll take additional questions. The Alaska Region Training and Technical Assistance Center is a resource of the Administration for Native Americans. Myself, I'm the Regional Director. I've been working with tribes here in Alaska for a little over 19 years. And our Training and Technical Assistance Manager is Angela Camus. She handles all of our workshops and training and leads our technical assistance and reviews on your applications before you submit them. Charles Peel is our Technology and E-Outreach Manager. And we also have a pool of technical consultants. Today's guest presenters, we have quite a few today. I'll be doing more formal introductions before each presentation, but we have Dory Beats, who's the Assistant Planner, Emergency Manager, and CERT Program Manager for the Tuolumne Band of Miwok Indians. She's also affiliated with ITEMA. She'll be talking about both today. We have Marsh Runner, the Tribal Administrator from Loudon Tribal Council, which is in Galena, Alaska. Also, we have Commander Jonathan D. White, Deputy Director of the Office of Human Services Emergency Preparedness and Response within the Administration for Children and Families. And we have Milo Booth, the National Tribal Affairs Advisor with FEMA. So welcome to all of our guest presenters. Thank you for participating today. The Alaska Region TTA Center offers a range of free technical assistance and training, and our Alaska Region website is anaalaska.org. You can also, we have links to all the other regional TTA providers there if you want to, depending on where you're located. And we also encourage you to go to the national website for extensive resources. This webinar will be posted both on our regional website and on the national website after several weeks. ANA has national webinars every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And our upcoming webinars are Designing and Funding Responses to Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, which will be October 2nd. And this is going to be presented by the Western Region TNTA Center. Project Orientation, a Practice for Successful Project Implementation on October 9th, and that'll be presented by the Eastern Region. And then Using Grant Solutions, October 23rd, and that will be presented by Angela Camus, our Training and Technical Assistance Manager here in Alaska. So if you'd like to register for any of these webinars, you can go to the regional TTA provider websites or the national ANA website and follow the links there to register. So today we'll be talking about emergency management, tribal emergency management, and we have a couple of goals. Number one, we're going to be discussing a framework for building emergency management capacity for tribes, and Dory will be taking the lead on that discussion. We'll also be learning about resources available from ANA, ACF, and ITEMA for tribal emergency management preparedness, response, and recovery. We'll be touching briefly on the concept of COOP, or Continuity of Operations Planning. We have a couple of examples of why that's important to engage in. And we also have updates from the National Tribal Affairs Advisor, Milo Booth, with FEMA. And actually, we're going to go ahead and let Milo present first here in a minute. But before we do that, I just wanted to go over a few common definitions within the emergency management realm. So the 4 phases of emergency management include mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So mitigation covers preventing future emergencies or minimizing their effects. Preparedness is preparing to handle an emergency. So a lot of your emergency operations planning, your continuity of operations planning, and also recovery planning happens during the preparedness stage. The response is responding safely to an emergency, and recovery is recovering from an emergency. So these are the 4 phases of emergency management that emergency managers use in their vernacular, I guess. And you might hear some of these throughout the presentation today. All right, so our first presenter today is Milo Booth. Milo is the FEMA National Tribal Affairs Advisor, and excuse me, just 1 second. The National Tribal Affairs Advisor works closely with FEMA programs to ensure visibility of tribal concerns and is a direct partner with national associations that represent tribal interests. As the NTAA, Milo provides guidance to FEMA regarding impacts of current and proposed policies and actions that may affect tribes, and helps to ensure that real and meaningful engagement takes place with those tribes. So Milo, he is actually an Alaska Native, and from the community of, or from the Metlakatla Indian community, currently one of our only recognized reservations. Milo served as a realty specialist for the U.S. Forest Service's Land and Realty Management Program, where he helped carry out the program's mission of securing and protecting the public's rights, title, value, and interest in its national forests and grasslands. He worked with and served as a tribal liaison. He worked with other tribal leaders, the USDA's Office of Tribal Relations, and the Forest Service Office of Tribal Relations. He has over 18 years of experience working with tribal, state, and federal agencies on land management. So Milo is going to be giving an update on the Tribal Disaster Declaration Policy, the Tribal Liaison Program within FEMA, and tribal consultations. So with that, I'd like to welcome Milo.
Thanks, Anthony. Before I get going, I would like to reiterate that I am from the Metlakatla Indian community, the only band of Tsimshians in the United States. Traditionally, they reside in British Columbia. I do hope that you all in Alaska are safe. I've seen that there was an earthquake, as we talked about earlier, and when I called my folks about a half hour ago, there was no tsunami warning, so that's good. Although I did not clear that with the emergency manager in Metlakatla, but I couldn't get a hold of him. So, but anyways, with that being said, I do come from a forestry background and a policy writing background. I initially got my start working in natural resources, getting a degree from Oregon State University, which was paid for by my tribe. Went back and worked for them for a number of years. 3.5 years ago, I made a transition out here to Washington, D.C., and became a realty specialist for the U.S. Forest Service. Not sure if I am, after reading today's newspaper, if I want to hide that fact now. If you'll see the commercial filming issue for fees, I actually wrote a great portion of that, as the government is trying to update its fee schedule, and today it came home to roost, and everybody's standing up screaming about how overpriced everything is in the National Forest already. Never mind the fact that it was initially written to lower the cost, but I digress. I'm here at FEMA now. I did spend the last 3 years doing consultations and outreach, whether it was Federal Register notices, seeking comments, and updating old policies. And when I started here at FEMA, which was actually May 22nd of this year, Anthony was one of the first people that I had met, and on my second week on the job, he asked me, hey, would you like to speak at our webinar in September? And I thought, okay. And here we are. So now as the National Tribal Affairs Advisor, I think Anthony hit the nail on the head when he said that I work internally here to ensure that any policy that's coming out of FEMA has the proper attention to tribes if it is affecting Indian country. Now, whether that's pointing it out to the subject matter experts or working with them to determine what types of engagement with tribes is needed, and on the flip side, working with tribes when that attention is needed to seek their comments, let them look at the proposed material, so on and so forth. I did come in at a very interesting time, as this position is now permanent. So, I am the NCAA, and we here at FEMA have actually staffed up this tribal branch. There are 2 full-time personnel working with me to handle the native account, and we're both all 3 of us are based out of headquarters. We do use interns in the summer as well, so we can pick up 1 or 2 extra folks on the part-time basis. We do lend support to our regional tribal liaisons, as most of you know who your liaisons are, and so we do work primarily with tribes, although like I had mentioned, coming in at an interesting time, there were 2 pieces of policy that were in the hopper back in May. First and foremost, the pilot declarations guidance, which was out for consultation when I had started. And as most of you know, that consultation closed on August 31st, just last month. We are currently going through the adjudication of comments. The last tally I had, we had just over 800 comments from Indian country, which we were really pleased with. And we'd like to thank all of you who have helped push out the importance of having tribes and tribal leaders voice their comments and their concerns or support or whatever it may be as these consultation and comment periods are open. The second piece was the tribal consultation policies, which had actually closed prior to me coming on board. So when I was hired in May, the project leads were going through the adjudication of comments, and that had made its way internally to get the proper signatures here at FEMA and onto the department, and then on to the Office of Management and Budget. And as you may know, last month, I believe it was on the 12th of August, the tribal consultation policy was signed into effect by Administrator Fugate. So we're very excited about that. And as we take this signed policy, we then need to put it into action, because it doesn't do us any good if we do something to work with tribes, such as the consultation policy, and then just let it sit and collect dust and wait for tribes to point out to us when consultation is needed or comments are needed. So we are taking a 2-pronged approach to that. First is the internal rollout. So I'm currently with my staff working with FEMA and the other staff directors and program managers to tell them what is in there, to encourage them to read it, to have them keep it in the back of their mind when they think that something is can potentially have a large effect on tribes. And so we offer to work with them to help construct potential rollouts for so the tribes can comment on any potential policy that may be coming out. That's ongoing, and it started already. Now, externally, to let the tribes know and the associations know, we are actually in the process of putting together 2 webinars ourselves on the topic of the tribal consultation policy. Now, the dates aren't set yet, but we're targeting October the 16th, which is a Thursday, and November the 6th, which is a Thursday. And I'll send out official emails to all of you online right now, so you can choose to take part in that if you have the time. It will just walk through what's been done, what's going to be done as we move forward, and if there's any questions, I would encourage you to log into those webinars when the announcements come out. And with all that being said, I'm open to any questions. If not, feel free to email me or contact me. Most of you may have my contact information. If not, feel free to get it from Anthony. And I'd encourage you guys to joining us on October 16th.
Wonderful. Thank you, Milo. Appreciate that. Okay, well next we have Dory Beats. Dory is the Assistant Planner and Emergency Manager, also CERT Program Manager for the Tuolumne Band of Miwok Indians. She's northern and southern Miwok and works and lives in Tuolumne, Rancheria in Central California. As a former tribal councilwoman, she understands the complexities of tribal governments and the need to foster better communication between tribes and outside agencies. She's involved in every aspect of emergency management, which makes her the perfect fit to kind of lay the framework here, which she's about to do, for building emergency management capacity. She sits on several tribal organization boards, and the one that she's going to be mentioning today is ITEMA. So with that, Dory, thanks for participating today, and take it away.
Great. Well, Machixus, Kuchi Iyama, Kaneoeshe, Dory Beats. Good afternoon and hello. As Anthony has said, my name is Dory Beats. And thank you to ANA and of course 3-Star for putting on this webinar. I think it's a great opportunity and a way to reach out to folks in this day of technology. I am southern and northern Miwok from the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California, kind of a little north of Yosemite National Park, 2.5 hours east of San Francisco Bay Area. As Anthony had said, I live and work on the Tuolumne Rancheria for my tribe, the Tuolumne Band of Miwok Indians, and I work both as a tribal planner and an emergency manager. And I'm very involved in tribal emergency management, both here in California as well as nationally with many of the different tribes and organizations that are out there. What I'd like to talk to you today is I really wanted to share with you my perspective and kind of insights into tribal emergency management. I'll talk a little bit about the historical perspective. I'll talk about what are some of the current issues that face tribes today. I will also then give you some ideas of where to start, and this I think is important definitely for tribes that don't have a formalized emergency management program, or maybe tribes that are just trying to expand currently what they have. I will talk a little bit about ANA and our particular grant here that we administered, and my first experience actually with ANA and managing that grant. And then I will follow up with a little bit about ITEMA, which is a National Tribal Emergency Management Association that I sit as a member of that's out there as a resource for tribal communities across the country. So first I'd like to talk a little bit about tribes as historical responders. And you know, when I speak a lot out to local agencies or even the state agencies, it always amazes me that non-Indians don't realize really how we as tribal communities are natural survivors. We have survived a lot, both obviously natural disasters as well as man-made. And as a community, we are the first to respond because that's what families do. And in our tribal communities, we are families. And that whole idea of whole communities, because we are always there in the time of need. When something occurs, whether it's rushing to assist during a natural or man-made disaster, we tend to pull together and we help each other in times of those needs. So we are historically great responders. Where we lack is really putting our plan of action onto paper. And while most tribal communities have survived without developing that paper plan, there are now resources that are out there available to us for reimbursement or assistance. But we have to have that paper form of a plan. As a planner, I have been taught really to kind of look at those conditions, look at potential issues and solutions to long-term needs. For some tribal communities, we have simply survived by just dealing with whatever comes our way. Again, we're good at that. We are very, very good at responding and helping those in our community. Planning ahead, like we do for the winter season for food or water, is something we do without hesitation. We do that because of survival. We have learned that that's how we survive. Planning ahead about the what-ifs of a potential disaster is sometimes often the last thing we think about. And it's not just tribal communities. Human beings by nature don't ever think that will happen to me. And so they only deal with what happens to them currently at that moment. So where has the idea of tribal emergency management planning really come from? I talk about environmental programs really have kind of set that stage. And if you look across the country in tribal communities, and even though they may be geographically different, location-wise or topography or types of disasters, emergencies that may occur in those tribal communities, a lot of what we consider to be emergency management programs have come from the environmental side. For some tribes, funding from EPA really kind of helped develop those environmental programs, and whether it was GAP funds or Clean Water Act projects, tribes started to think about chemical response or hazardous waste potential on tribal lands. And that was really coming from the EPA side, getting tribes and those programs to think about what would happen in the event of a chemical response or a hazardous waste spill near a tribal community. So EPA was really mandating those environmental resource plans to address those issues, and really as separate components. Most tribes today really don't have that designated emergency manager. We are multitaskers, and in tribal communities where funds often are limited, we have collateral duties. And that's not simply because we don't care about emergency management as a priority. It's just been based on need. And emergency management in the non-traditional, non-tribal sense really wasn't always needed because we are good at responding. So that collateral duty, we all do it. I do it as a planner. I serve working on transportation plans. I write grants. I do fuels reduction projects. I do real estate. I do assistance for youth and educational needs, natural resource. I do GIS, and I do emergency management. I happen to actually love the emergency management side of it, so I try to do that as often as possible. Some tribes then started out, with fire or law enforcement because they needed more immediate response. It just became an immediate response because of location in remote areas, hard to get to, something all of you know too well in the state of Alaska, that as tribal governments and as tribal communities trying to develop programs within to respond from within tended to be easier, or you received a timely response as opposed to waiting for somebody from the outside. And so that's where a lot of the the fire and law enforcement side of emergency response has been developed. Currently, there's a lot of issues. So while we have survived many natural disasters, we now have other issues that we need to consider within as a tribal community. Inherent to our fundamental right as sovereign entities, we have the responsibility to provide for our people. That can mean many different things between one tribe and another. Tribal governments must be able to protect their communities. In today's age, there are so many other new influences that affect our ability to do so. The internal and external growth. We've grown. Our tribal communities are growing, not just in our membership, but maybe our land base. With that comes more infrastructure, more buildings, and more property and lives to protect. Climate change. Mother Nature, she's constantly testing us. No longer are tornadoes just in Kansas or Oklahoma. Earthquakes are more frequent, as are tsunamis and hard winter storms. Wildfire season is no longer just in the summer months, but all year for some regions. Climate change really is constant, and as the world population grows, so does the impact we have and the resulting effect Mother Nature has on us. Need for a plan. While we have survived disasters and emergencies within our tribal communities, the need for planning or a plan is so much more important than before. Some think it might be a waste of time to sit down and discuss what might happen and how we will respond to it. But if we truly want to recover, it is better to think about the what ifs now, decide how we can respond, and most importantly, what steps we will take to recover from that disaster or an emergency. We must also talk about what we are doing, what we can do now in order to mitigate or lessen the impact of future events. And Anthony had talked about those different phases and the preparedness, the response, the mitigation, and the recovery. Those are all areas that will impact our tribal community with respect to a disaster or an emergency. Confusing policies. Add to the issues that I've already identified, there are terms such as hazard mitigation plans, chemical response plans, mitigation recovery, SOPs, EOPs, SOGs, ICS, COOP, COGS. So many of these acronyms, so many documents, and so many procedures that exist out there in the world of emergency management. It can be very confusing, and for tribal communities that are just learning about this as a process, as a formalized plan, it can be definitely hard to take all in at once. Most often ask, where is that start manual? What are the basic steps, and how do we even begin? So one of my recommendations, and one of the things that I like to emphasize, is where you start. No matter where you're at in your emergency management as a tribal community, or how you want to help tribal communities develop their emergency management program, first and foremost, you need to understand your risks. What happens in your tribal community? Is there flooding every year? Are you susceptible to wildfires? What about earthquakes or tsunamis? Are there events that happen every year or only once in 20 years? Knowing what those risks are and what the potential threat they have to your community is the first step. Looking to other tribes and tribal organizations, there are some phenomenal examples out there and some great resources. I'll get into a little bit more depth about one of those organizations, FEMA, that can be of assistance, but I really try to emphasize looking to other tribes that have already taken the steps that you can learn from. Life is too short to make the same mistake over and over again. And one thing I am proud as a Native American, as in a tribal community, is that we share our resources. Whether it's here in California, extending that hand out to those of you in Alaska, or across the country to Oklahoma or Maine or North Carolina, we now have developed a phenomenal framework of tribal communities out there that have already lived through something, have already gone through the painstaking task of identifying or developing documents. And those tribes are more than eager to help you out. So spend some time researching what those existing plans are as templates. They're out there. Whether you ask another tribe or tribal organization or spend some time on the internet, it's amazing what already exists out there that's available for you as a resource. Again, even if you don't have an existing plan or a process, or you want to update yours, take a look at what some of the other tribe and tribal communities are doing, whether it's your region, your state, or collectively across the country. Very, very proud of what tribal communities are doing in the area of emergency management or response. Reaching out to federal, state, and local agencies. We have become not so much dependent anymore upon the U.S. government. You know, many years early on, many tribal communities always relied 100% on them. Well, now it's not so much that need, it's a want of interacting. And Milo and FEMA, the folks at FEMA, have been doing a phenomenal job at developing programs specific to provide assistance to tribal communities, not only before, during, and after. We had here at Tuolumne the Rim Fire last year, third largest wildfire ever in the history of California, butted right up to our tribal community, and we were in it. While the fire did not actually touch tribal lands, it did impact cultural resources of adjoining lands, but it affected our air quality. But we served as a great model at working out a relationship with those folks. But FEMA was here to help me every step of the way, whether it was on the phone or coming later to talk about and prepping for the recovery side and how you get reimbursed for certain costs that we incurred during that particular event. So FEMA is one of those agencies that's done a great job. Reach out to them. Same with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs now has regional folks dedicated to emergency management, and they're doing a great job as providing a resource and being there, if anything, just on the phone to help you get to those right places or to get resources to you and understand what your needs might be. States are getting better. It's a constant give and take in an education process. We've done it a little bit differently here in California, and I think there's definitely always room for improvement in how the states actually address and fulfill the needs of tribal governments in respect to emergency management, both in preparedness and in training opportunities, but also definitely in response. So reaching out to those, as well as your local agency, whatever form that may be, the boroughs or community agencies that might be there and able to provide assistance to you as a tribal government. Seek training. I cannot stress this enough. The more you can get trained on, the better. There are some great resources out there. FEMA, again, has some great online courses. You can also even go out to EMI, the Emergency Management Institute, for little or no cost to you to get some training. Take advantage of this. There's a lot out there. And there's a lot of free training that's out there, so that it's a little or no cost to you as a tribe or a tribal community or as an individual within a tribe. They're also sponsoring training from tribal organizations who put on training, ANA, this webinar. There's a lot of things that are out there that are a great way to receive that training. Take advantage of that because it's a great opportunity to learn about what's out there with respect to tribal emergency management programs and assistance. Preparing your community one day at a time. If this is my most single message, prepare your community. That's really what I have to emphasize, and I truly believe in that. The more we can as an individual prepare ourselves for a disaster, the emergency, the better we can participate in our community, in our tribal community then, to prepare for, to respond to, and recover from a disaster or an emergency. Talking to your community, spending time with your elders, your children, your staff. Here I try to get into our elders luncheon every other month. I talk about, hey, what's your plan? Do you have your kit ready? What are you going to do in the event of evacuation? Do you have your medicines? You know, have you talked it over with your caregiver? Have you talked it over with your children that may not live here? Do those things constantly, having that discussion with your local community and preparing for them, preparing with them. Form a LEPC, or a local emergency planning committee, and this could be, you know, certain key staff within the tribal community or interested individuals within your community who want to come in and once a month talk about emergency preparedness, talk about what some of the issues may be. Just start getting people to talk about it, and it's amazing once people talk about it how much more they want to be involved. Youth. I went and spoke to our local tribal youth one day, showed them a couple of videos, and immediately they went home and they asked their parents, hey, do we have an emergency kit? What's our plan if something happens and I'm at school? They were raising the questions to their parents, and their parents were calling me the next day going, Dory, what are you talking with our kids about emergency? You know, where do I get this information? And so empower our youth, who then will turn around and also want to empower the rest of the community to be prepared for an emergency. Creating a CERT, which is a community emergency response team. We have one here. It is now kind of something not new across emergency management in the country, but for tribal communities, creating that team of volunteers who have been trained to assist others in the event of emergency. Empowering your tribal members, volunteers, your staff, whoever may be in this basic 20-hour course could save a life and definitely give you extra hands during the event of emergency. ICS training I talk about, we have mandated for our tribal employees incident command system, basic 100, 200, 700, 800. All 4 of those courses are actually available FEMA online that you can do online, and it engages your staff members and your community members about the incident command system and what occurs during the event of an emergency and how we can collectively work together as a group. Now let me just talk a little bit about our experience here with ANA, and I see that Mark Allender from Washington, D.C. I think is on this call as well, as webinar. But here at Tuolumne, we applied for and received ANA funding. It was specific to a master plan. So it wasn't emergency management preparedness specifically, but it was a master plan. And we really wanted to identify those areas, update our comprehensive codes, create a master plan of all of our tribal lands. Some of the issues really that we identified in that plan were that we weren't keeping track of the plans or the ordinances that impacted our community, and they actually conflicted in some instances or impacted one another. And it identified some of those areas that we were missing when it talked about master planning for a community. It gave us a map of where we were headed long term, and it really considered some of the future needs, what our demographics were today, where we might be headed in the future, and what type of infrastructure would be needed in order to grow within that community. One of the results of our ANA grant really was that it identified gaps in our emergency preparedness. And one of those was specific to access. We have one way in our tribal community and one way out. And during the event of an emergency, whether it be a wildfire, an earthquake, maybe a man-made disaster, whatever it may be, we did not have a plan of how to evacuate 80+ homes out of our tribal community if the main entrance was blocked. So through our ANA grant, that was one of those areas that we identified. And then we turned around and applied for additional funding through other federal agencies and state agencies to do GIS mapping. I'll talk about the benefits to GIS mapping here a little bit farther, but identifying those potential other access areas and laying out a framework of how we were going to build those roads in order to have those alternative accesses available in the event of emergency. It also identified the need to stimulate kind of intergovernmental cooperation with outside first responders. Again, most of our tribal communities are located in remote areas, and there isn't a defined relationship for first response. So if we have a disaster or an emergency in tribal lands, if we didn't have our own mechanism, whether it's fire or law enforcement, who is going to come help us? And so it identified the need to develop those relationships with local agencies that could provide that service to us. And again, it led to seeking additional funds to actually create a part-time emergency manager. That'd be me, really to develop some of those plans that we were missing, the hazard mitigation plans, the emergency operations plans, those documents that we needed to really facilitate the discussion amongst the tribal community about what we would do in the event of an emergency. Through the various trainings that I had received and in talking with other tribes across the country, I met up with a group of tribal folks that identified a need to create a national tribal organization. As a result, ITEMA was created for Indian country by Indian country. And ITEMA is made up collectively of tribal folks all over. Some that will actually, the majority have boots on the ground experience, had either served in some capacity as emergency manager or fire or law enforcement in their tribal community during a disaster or an emergency. And that group of folks collectively identified, wow, we need to provide some kind of resource for tribal communities across the country. And so the mission of ITEMA is to promote a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach to prepare for, protect against, respond to, and recover from, and mitigate against all hazards that impact tribal communities. ITEMA provides subject matter experts to assist tribes during, prior to, during, and after a disaster emergency. Again, most of our tribal communities, whether or not you have a non-existent tribal emergency program, you may have something that's somewhat in the works. You have some plan, some mechanism to provide assistance, or you have a full-fledged, fully operational tribal emergency management program that can assist your community. There is still always ways to learn new things. Subject matter experts that can assist tribes prior to. What do you do? Where do you start? How do you even think about developing a program? What do you need to do first? What training should you offer first? How do you get those individuals? ITEMA definitely is made up of individuals that provide that training, whether it's CERT instructors or ICS instructors or functional exercise instructors to help your community develop and plan for and respond. That disaster assistance team, boots on the ground, one of the things that ITEMA is starting to develop is really become the response organization from a tribal perspective. We all know as tribal communities that when the disaster hits, first of all, it's mayhem. It really is, even for those of us that maybe have a little bit more experience. But for most tribal communities, it can be very chaotic. It can be very stressful. And one of the things that ITEMA is doing in collaboration with other tribal organizations and federal and state entities is creating a disaster assistance team that is made up of tribal folks that understand culturally what it's like to work with the tribal government. We know that things don't often always happen overnight, and there's a cultural difference that is there that you can't teach to the outside local agency or even federal or state governments when they need to work with the tribal community. And so ITEMA is providing that group that can come, even whether it's on the phone or come to that tribal community during a disaster and help you get through those steps and take some of those steps to make sure you're providing or protecting both your infrastructure, property, and definitely lives. It's a database of technical experts in Indian country that can assist you when you need it. So again, that's a part of that response side. Where are you at? What do you need? How can we help you? How can we help you with other agencies? Again, FEMA has developed a great program. BIA has developed a great program. All continually need improvement, but they can't always be at multiple places. Tribal liaisons that are created in regions can't be at multiple sites. So ITEMA can help fill that void sometimes when tribes need that, just not so much hand-holding, but just that reassurance and that walkthrough of what's available at that moment. Assistance and training in all aspects of emergency management. Again, from just strategy, sit down and talk with tribal communities, their staff, their councils, their governments, their community members, what it means to develop a strategic emergency management plan. What are the simple steps that you can take now? What are the long-term plan? How you get there, how you fund that. All of that is available. That initial assessment of a tribe's emergency management capabilities, which kind of identifies those strengths, those weaknesses, and those areas of improvement. We were actually asked by a tribe in Southern California to help with 3 years of training on how to, where do we start and how do we get there? Baby steps, one step at a time. ITEMA has some other great initiatives, and this is actually where Anthony and I had met during the Alaska Shield exercise. And BIA was having a national TAC-G called. These are available to all tribes to participate in. It's a Tribal Assistance Coordinating Group, and they have them once a month. And they is an opportunity for tribes that may be dealing with a disaster or an emergency to speak to everybody else in the country about what their needs may be. But it's also a great opportunity to develop relationships prior to a disaster. And one of the things that we're doing, and one of the things that I personally believe in, is GIS mapping and the ability to map out prior to, but obviously during an event. And for those that aren't experienced in GIS mapping, it's a phenomenal tool that's available to create and identify graphically some of the things that are occurring in your tribal community. For my community, it's a great way to show our elders and our community members, here's your land. That base map. This is where the boundaries are. This is what the topography is. And this is why topography and understanding your topography is important for flooding, for slide potential, for wildfire and vegetation. Where are those roads? Where are those access points? How do you get from here to there? What does that mean? What are the utilities and where are they? How could they be impacted, specific to emergency management? What may zoning may be? Is there potential for development of infrastructure in these areas, and what does that mean for fire suppression? What does that mean for emergency management? How fast are we going to grow, and how many more people will be living here 10, 20, 30 years down the road? So in that particular instance in the GIS and the earthquake exercise, we were able to take the example or the exercise location and reach out and look at those tribes that potentially could be impacted by that earthquake or a resulting tsunami. And so we were able to do that right here from our offices, from our computer, from afar. And it was really only meant to serve as a kind of what-if capability for those folks on the call. But it turned out that our actually map that we created was then actually in the information center and a part of the actual exercise. But it's a great potential for what ITEMA is trying to develop GIS nationally to help those tribal communities during the prior to it, to understand and identify those potential risks and those infrastructure, but also to during the event to help educate the outside about what potential impacts that tribal community might be going through at that moment. So very excited about that potential that initiative. So with that, I put my contact information up here. I am always available, whether email or I have my work number or my cell number. I also have the ITEMA information. The website is actually not on there, but it's www.itema.org. You can find more information about us on there. I really want to just emphasize in emergency management, it's not something you can do in one day and something that you can't learn in one day. It sometimes takes a while, but taking those baby steps, understanding that there is that framework that's available there for you, and that I hope that this is just the beginning of maybe some other webinars that we can hone in on some specific, like hazard mitigation plans or emergency operations plans, to really provide some of that technical assistance. I'm available, we're available, Anthony knows how to get a hold of me. Again, you can contact me directly, but really want to emphasize that the importance is to developing a plan. Whether you have one now or you don't have one, is sitting and thinking about it and talking with your tribal community. Disaster has no borders, but as a tribal community, we are great at responding, and now we just have to sit down and put it in more of a paper, because there's some benefits to that. There is a lot of resources that are available out there. There's funds for reimbursement to help you recover from the disaster, but you got to start with that plan, and we have to put it on paper in a way that we can then articulate what our current issues are, what our needs are, and also how we can also maybe prevent some of that disaster in the future, or at least lessen the impact of a potential disaster. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I'm definitely available for any questions.
Well, thank you, Dory. Really appreciate that. That was great. I'm just looking at the time here, so I'm going to go ahead and go on. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the resources that ANA has, and then that's going to lead into March Runner's presentation on her experience with Loudoun Tribal Council and the Galena flood. And then we'll wrap up the webinar with Commander Jonathan White's presentation on ACF resources. But before I go into ANA, I just wanted to briefly say that at the National Tribal Emergency Management Conference last month, I think it was, one of the recommendations that came out was for the Department of Homeland Security's Emergency Management Preparedness grants to be able to go directly to tribes. As a lot of you know, those funds currently go to the state emergency management programs, and then states hopefully then open up funding to the tribes. At least here in the state of Alaska, we actually haven't seen that happen. But the recommendation was loud and clear that it does need to happen, that the tribes need to be able to receive those resources directly in order to fund some of this preparedness. So that takes us to some of the resources that ANA has, which are limited. ANA's mission, I guess, is to promote self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. ANA's vision is that Native communities are thriving. So the Administration for Native Americans total funding portfolio for 2014 is $46 million in grants, with approximately 178 grantees. And this is these grants are spread out over a vast landscape that includes not only federally recognized tribal governments, tribal organizations, tribal nonprofits in North America, but also Native Pacific Islander organizations in the Pacific and Native Hawaiian organizations. So really, ANA funds projects pretty much all the way around the globe. If you look at the map, for eligible entities, ANA eligible entities. And those eligible entities, just to say it one more time, is Alaska Native organizations, tribal organizations, tribal nonprofits, nonprofits serving Native Hawaiians and Indian and Alaska Native organizations, as well as public and nonprofit agencies serving other Native Pacific Islanders. So a couple of the programs that relate to emergency preparedness where we've seen projects include the SEDS program, Social and Economic Development Strategies, and the Environmental Regulatory Enhancement program. So we'll go over those briefly. So for the SEDS program, who is eligible? Federally recognized tribes and non-federally recognized tribes, Native nonprofits, including federal, state, or tribally chartered, Native Pacific Islanders, tribal colleges. So that's just the organizations that are eligible. And for ERE, the Environmental Regulatory Enhancement Program, the eligible applicants, it's a smaller pool of eligible applicants. It's limited to the federally recognized tribes and Alaska Native villages and or nonprofit village consortia that are defined within the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So it's a narrower group of eligible organizations that can pursue the ERE funding. SEDS funds community identified projects, not ongoing programs. So if you're looking for a long-term funding source for your emergency management program, ANA is not the source. It will fund capacity building and related projects. The SEDS projects can be for up to 3 years, $400,000 in federal dollars per budget period, not including your match, up to $1.2 million for a 3-year project. Some of the purpose areas within the SEDS program that relate to emergency management preparedness that you see in the funding opportunity announcements includes governance, which is increasing the ability of tribal and Alaska Native village governments to exercise local control and decision-making. Emergency preparedness, which is planning and coordinating emergency response services within the community. Interoperability, which is promoting program coordination among human and social service programs for Native communities. And ACF program support, which is strengthening infrastructure and increased capacity for tribal governments. So these are suggestive. These are the funding opportunity announcement clearly states that projects are not strictly related to these, but they must be community-driven projects defined by the local tribal and Native communities. And ANA stresses that emphatically. So under the ERE program, ERE emphasizes community-driven, locally designed projects that strengthen tribal governments and organizations' ability to identify, plan, and develop environmental regulatory programs. So earlier, Dory mentioned that most of the tribes have gotten into the emergency management realm through the environmental program route, as opposed to the more traditional natural disaster preparedness route. And so this is a much smaller program within ANA. There's a small handful of projects that are funded each year. Some of these are projects that are doing baseline studies. So in the area of climate change, some of the tribes are doing baseline studies to prepare for and mitigate climate change, just as an example. So in addition to the competitive SEDS funding, ANA has also on occasion awarded emergency funding through the SEDS program, and a couple of examples include the California wildfires, which in 2007 provided six-month-long recovery projects for 5 tribes and 1 nonprofit. In 2008, in response to Hurricanes Ike and Gustav, ANA funded a 3-year project. And also in response to the American Samoa tsunami, ANA funded 5 projects there to assist the communities that were affected. So this brings us to the emergency funding that March Runner is going to be talking about in Galena. March Runner is the tribal administrator for Loudoun Tribal Council, and she's been the administrator for 8 years. She's managed a host of projects, state and federal grants, She's got a BS in business management, a master's in computer science, business operations, and a law degree. Basically, just think of March as a miracle worker, having responded to the recovery, wearing a myriad of hats. I have nothing but the deepest respect for what she's doing on the ground, helping to rebuild the community with many other agencies and partners. What I asked March to do, she's participating on the phone. Unfortunately, in a lot of our villages, the internet is not that great, so she wasn't able to participate via webinar. But I asked her to just kind of paint the picture about what happened in 2013 with the flooding in Galena, and then more specifically the ANA project and some of the details about that project. So I have a few photos that I'll show before I give it over to March. This is the Yukon River where Galena is located. This is prior to the flood in 2013, May. This is before breakup, what we call breakup. And then at the height of the flood, as the river was breaking up and there was an ice jam and resulting in severe flooding of the community. So that just kind of set the stage. So March, if you could go ahead and take it from here.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Like I said, I have been here 8 years. I'm from the Blackfeet Nation of Montana, and in the 8 years I've been here in Galena, we have an emergency program where we grid up and we get ready to accept evacuees from the 6 to 7 villages up and down the river from us, because those are the villages that flood. The last time Galena had a major flood was in 1974, and that spearheaded the creation of the Newtown area. And where we had the Old Town area would have continued to have minor flooding, it did. The Newtown area was unaffected, and so we were basically caught by a big surprise by what happened last year. When he shows you the pictures of the map where they show Galena, what caused the flood here was a 75-mile ice jam that started at Bishop Rock and caused a spreading of overflow of the river, caused a flooding of creating over 100 miles basically on either side, 50 miles on either side. And in our community, the river came up very fast, and we were very lucky not to have lost any lives in that flood, because during the Air Force Base, when the 1974 flood came in, the Air Force built a back road as an emergency exit in case we lost the front road. Well, what was so weird about this year, that flood last year, is that our escape road was the first road to go, and so we were blocked off. And it shows like the flood starting was May 27th, and most of the people, some of the individuals that were evacuated out here by May 28th. And the community began meeting immediately when the water resided, and the state came in and started helping us and we were in immediate recovery. And what was the saving grace for our area is that the communities up and down the river that didn't flood came to help us recover, and it was really great to see those people come in, because we were the ones usually going to their communities helping them, and this time they were coming to help us. And so with community meetings starting to be held, initially with the state, and after the declaration of the emergency on June 25th, FEMA came in the first week of July. And they started working and taking records and investigating and looking at everything. 250 people were evacuated from Galena, and there are 264 homes. And out of the 264 homes here, only 9 were not damaged by the flood. 9 were untouched. We had a total of 12 homes that were totally destroyed and had to be rebuilt. and the rest of them homes have been repaired, and depending on the amount of repair work is still going on. Our tribal office was damaged to the point that we lost our first floor and we lost a lot of records. We had started, our normal process for responding to emergency is moving our records from the first floor up to the second floor, and we were in the process of doing that when the flood started, and it came up so fast that we were not able to move a lot of things upstairs. And our office eventually was condemned, and we have relocated, thanks to the city making available a building. We have a temporary shelter until we can build a new building. Critical infrastructure damage happened in Galena, where we lost our power, our water plant, our sewage, and the levee was almost compromised. Had the levee gone, the airport would have gone, and there would probably be no Galena here right now. Natural resources were severely impacted because of the way the flood spread out. We lost berry fields, berry picking fields. We lost the immigration paths that moose follow. Our migratory birds left. So most of the natural resources that are used for subsistence were gone. And even this year, we're finding that they have not returned. And economic impacts is our community is like some businesses that were here are lost now because they weren't able to get the funding to get started again. The city lost a lot of money because the power system was down, and any of the private businesses were going on had to be suspended because they were rebuilding. We started working with A&A, I'm trying to think, back in July of last year, and we started looking at what we needed to do. And our tribal offices were in every house right now is all in the flood zone right now. So we have to realize we're in the National Flood Insurance Program, and we're working with FEMA, we're working with the state, we're working with volunteers that are coming in. We're working with different funding sources to rebuild the community, but we had no funding really to help rebuild the tribal office, and that's where A&A has stepped in to help us dramatically. Like I said, our office was badly damaged, and finally the city said, okay, you have to get out of it, and we were forced to move in March, and we came here. We lost a lot of records, and we lost a lot of computers, and we lost a lot of equipment with that flood hitting us. And tribal members in the flood zone needed to relocate during the flood. 194 individuals were evacuated from the community, and I think some had left earlier because the school system had closed, and those are teachers that are not here during the summer. But approximately 65 individuals remained in the community and did not evacuate. And it's because of those individuals a lot of work was started. We lost skilled staff in our community because of the flood, because they were renting property and they could not come back. I lost staff here that could not return because they lost their home and they had no place to live. And while they were living in Fairbanks or Anchorage, some of them accepted other positions. And then basically they moved their whole families out and they came back. We have a huge number of volunteers, federal, state, and private volunteers coming in, providing a lot of opportunities. Now, with the grant that we have applied for, it's going to be able to not only help the tribe rebuild and replace what we lost, help us rebuild our records, help us develop a computer system, which is a networking system that will have a central location so that if this happens again, knock on wood it won't, we can unplug and basically walk away with the bulk of our information and not lose it. We thought about using iCloud and other sources of backing up documentation, but as stated before, because we are in rural Alaska, that doesn't always work. I've tried to use iCloud on my own personal computer, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I don't want to take that chance using that system here for the tribal government because there's too many critical confidential records we might lose. With the grants that we've been able to procure through ANA under the emergency funding, is going to allow us to refurbish and replace furniture, computers, equipment that was lost on the first floor, and we're able to rebuild, recover and rebuild our tribal records. And we're going to be hiring some college students and some high school students to work with us, and it will to help us rebuild. And those students will be getting a background of administration and how all our programs operate, and they'll also get work. Basically, they'll get a small part-time job with work experience that they can use with their resumes. And they'll be working with our funding agencies, helping us rebuild information that we lost. They'll be working with I've contacted somebody with Tanana Chiefs who's going to be coming up with a computer, helping rebuild our computer system and transferring information so we have a network where all our information is going to be centrally located. And it's going to be a great program. We're going to be able to pay stipends to the high school. The college enrolled students are going to be helping us. We're going to be contracting with TNNR Chiefs basically to help bring somebody out here to help rebuild. And we didn't lose everything, but we'll be able to bring in. If you want to go for lessons learned, number one is don't expect it's not going to happen. And Galena, basically, in the Newtown area, has never flooded. And that's why they moved up here in the 70s. We had high water, but we never flooded. The Old Town area continually flooded. And when we got hit by the flood in 2013, the Newtown area flooded before the Old Town area flooded. And we're working with a lot of organizations, and ANA has been like a godsend to us with the tribal office because we're still struggling and trying to piece everything together and put our office back there. We are providing services, and what we had to do initially before we could get back into the tribal office, we were working out of homes that were family members that were in Fairbanks where their homes were gutted. They were allowing us to set up our offices in some of those homes to work out of those. My cabin was a central location where it was gutted, but it was the main center office, and we were able to hook up phones and electricity and to keep it going. And so basically our services were shut down for only about 3 weeks before we were back up and going again. But with working with ANA, hello?
You're good.
Working with ANA, it's like we'll be able to recover and put back together our office and be totally functional by the end of next September. Any questions? Hello?
Thank you, Marge. Thank you. I appreciate that overview of some of your experience with the flood, and also more specifically the impacts on your tribal office and your services. So that really highlights an issue that, believe it or not, a lot of tribes have already faced, both here in Alaska and in the lower 48. Another example of this, a couple of years ago, Sleeping Traditional Council lost their community center And in our smaller communities, the community centers, everything. It's the it's the tribal office, post office, sometimes the washateria where people go to bathe and wash their clothes. So in Sleeping's case, they lost the entire building, they lost all their records, and ended up having to rebuild those records, similar to what Galena is experiencing right now. More recently, on the Navajo Reservation, I read about 2 chapter buildings that burned down, and apparently it was an arson. But in that instance, there was actually some preparedness, and they ended up backing up some of their financial data, so they're probably going to be able to recover quicker, and that will certainly help them when they try to resume their services. So we need to be thinking about how to ensure that tribes' program operations continue after a disaster. And I mentioned earlier that the emergency management preparedness grants that are supposed to fund this type of work aren't making it out to many of the tribes, at least here in Alaska. This is an area that is needed and has to be addressed. I pulled together a couple of templates for what's called a continuity of operations plan, or COOP. And basically these are just plans that address what will your tribe do, or will your program or your agency or your office to continue operations with the least amount of disruption after an emergency. And the one template that I pushed out, if you didn't get it, I'll email it. It's a FEMA template, small business disaster plan. It's very basic, but it'll give you a sense of some of the things to be thinking about in your continuity of operations planning, addressing basic program contact information, what hazards your tribal office or program might face that could disrupt your operations. Critical assets, we heard about the records being lost, and those are essential for any type of grant-funded programs. Critical operations, key suppliers, key contractors, and key vendors, your computer and software inventory, how to address data security and records management in the face of a disaster. And then March mentioned how they've had to, she's had to work out of her house, and how many of her staff ended up getting scattered, some going to Fairbanks. So what to do, what's the alternative workplace when the primary workplace is lost? Notifying staff, addressing continuity in the management of your programs in case there's a loss of life or the executive management is lost. And then other considerations like insurance coverage. And so those are just some elements of continuity of operations planning for your program that tribes should start to take into consideration and address. So thanks, March. And now our last presentation is going to be, let me fast forward here, presented by Commander Jonathan D. White. Dr. White is Deputy Director of the Office of Human Services, Emergency Preparedness and Response with the Administration for Children and Families. He's an officer in the U.S. Public Health Service, a licensed clinical social worker, and a specialist in disaster human services and the needs of children and youth in disasters. Dr. White is familiar with the situation in Galena because there was a response there as well. I'd like to welcome Commander White.
Thank you very much. And I will say it's an honor to be able to speak with so many colleagues in the Alaska Native community working on the health and the safety and the security of communities. I want to talk, and I will strive to be brief, about ways that the Administration for Children and Families can support the work that you are doing as leaders in Alaska Native communities on preparedness, response, and recovery for disasters. So,
Jonathan, can I interrupt? Can you try to get a little closer to the mic?
Absolutely. Let me move that. I apologize. I hope is that clearer?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I want to start with this photograph from a disaster far from Alaska, but embodying a common experience of communities everywhere in disasters, which is that the landscape and fabric of communities, especially for children and youth and vulnerable and low-income members of the community, is very vulnerable to disaster events. And to that end, for both tribal and non-tribal communities, what we in the Administration for Children and Family really strive to do is to provide technical assistance, subject matter expertise, to support leadership in tribes and states to prepare for, respond to, and recover from the effects of disasters, in particular the way that disasters put a disproportionate burden on children and youth, and also so I want to talk both for those interested in travel emergency management issues in Alaska and nationwide in the lower 48 elsewhere, about ways that ACF can support you in your work. As a reminder, the Administration for Children and Families, of which the Administration for Native Americans is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and it is far from a household name, ACF, but a lot of its programs are household names. And there are a lot of the programs that in Indian country are used by tribes to help address the social and economic well-being of families and children and whole communities. So for disasters, a number of ACF's programs are particularly relevant when disaster strikes, including ANA's, SEDS, and other grant programs, but also programs like Tribal Head Start, Tribal Child Care and Development Fund programs, and Tribal TANF and Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Programs, among others. Within a very large agency that is ACF, I work in the smallest of its many offices, but we strive to be hardworking despite being small, and that's the Office of Human Services Emergency Preparedness and Response. And our work is really designed to help ACF as a whole support the work that states and tribes and territories are doing for their people in disasters. I think one of our key priorities is to try and change facts on the ground the way that disasters often have disproportionately burdened some communities and some members of the community, resulting in especially low-income families with children faring worse after disaster than some of their neighbors. This is something that we believe nationwide we can all do better at, and a lot of our work is designed to help support the work of states and tribes in ensuring equitable recovery from disasters. So having said that, we do a few different things in OSEPR, but I would really like to sort of zero in the interest of time, on how we support tribes in all four of the ANA regions. In ACF, we provide support to tribes through a partnership of OSEPR and the 10 ACF regional administrators' offices. And we do have a regional emergency management specialist in each of those offices, who's often the primary point of contact for our grantees at the tribal level looking to work on their preparedness plan in the human services arena. I think when I think about sort of ACF programs that are really critical based on the experiences of what our tribal partners tell us, for human services and disaster, I think there are 5 programs that are of paramount importance. The early childhood programs, and that means tribal child care and tribal head start programs. Child welfare programs, including family reunification for children who may get separated from their families by the effect of a disaster. Tribal TANF programs, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, and for states and tribes everywhere, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Programs, because disasters do have the effect of increasing risk for both children and adults of violence. There are a lot of ways that we in ACF may get brought into a disaster to support a tribe. We may be brought in as part of the National Response Framework or the National Disaster Recovery Framework. But often we are brought in simply by a request from one of our grantees. And I do want to say this, if you are an ACF grantee, or Head Start, or for Tribal TANF, or Tribal Child Care and Development Fund, an ANA grantee, if a disaster is affecting the ability of your ACF-supported program to serve the people that you are working to serve, then please do reach out to us. There may be ways that we can assist. We also do get involved when FEMA tasks us to help support tribes in a tribal or joint state tribal presidentially declared disaster. We have a handful of capabilities that we think can be really useful to tribes. One, and I think this one's really very important, is in the preparedness phase. Planning support to our grantees to help them think about what would it take both to be able to continue operations through the disaster, but also to address some of the needs that can crop up in communities after disasters. Disasters can have the effect of putting a lot of people at a new kind of risk and changing the landscape of a community in terms of what kinds of services are needed for helpful. Second, we are looking to support tribes as well as states in the creation of children and youth task forces, which are sort of broad coalitions at the community level of all of the agencies and all of the organizations and all the community groups that serve children and youth every day, to work together to make plans for how they'll continue to meet the needs of children and youth post-disaster, and how they'll work after disaster to support children and youth, recognizing that in every community, children and youth are often disproportionately burdened by disaster, are at heightened risk of most kinds of disaster-related harms, and we've seen in many communities that these task forces can help to change that. Third, we can deploy subject matter experts in the needs of children and youth in disaster when that's a request. For example, recently we deployed to help in the Snohomish, Washington, and nearby tribes affected by the mudslide and landslides disaster on State Route 530. We also can deploy subject matter experts in ACF human services programs and how they can be leveraged to help out in disaster. Usually that kind of deployment does require a presidential disaster declaration, and tribal emergency managers for that declaration would go through FEMA. But just because you don't have a presidential declaration, if you're affected, you can still reach out to us. We may or may not be able to deploy someone. We can still provide technical assistance and subject matter expertise by phone. We also have human services liaison officers. And when FEMA activates us in a presidential declaration, we operate an immediate disaster case management program at FEMA's request that can help connect survivors to resources that can help them. As I mentioned, in every one of the ACF regions, and there are 10 of those, they don't map perfectly the ANA 4 regions, but if you aren't sure who the regional emergency management specialist for your region is and you'd like to contact them, you can always write us and we will connect you. You can write us at ocep@acf.hhs.com. We do support the development, as I mentioned, of children and youth task forces and deploy children's needs and human services subject matter experts. I do want to talk for just a quick minute about children and youth task forces that many state and local and tribal communities are finding are really useful. These are forums that bring together everyone who serves children to focus on children and youth and families, plan planning for disasters and recovery from disasters. And we believe strongly these work best when the tribal government supports them, or the state government supports them, but everybody in the community who serves children has a seat at the table. Whether it be, that would include elders who work regularly with children, it would mean the healthcare workers in the community who work with children, it would mean the schools, the child care facilities, the Head Start Center, whoever it is, the recreational groups, whoever's working with children and youth. And together they can develop a common picture on what's going on for children in the disaster and work to get a coordinated strategy. Examples of some of those task forces that have been real success stories. The tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri in May of 2011. Hurricane Isaac that hit Louisiana in 2012. Superstorm Sandy in both states of New York and New Jersey. And most recently, that State Route 530 slide disaster that hit Snohomish County, Washington, and several nearby tribes. If you're interested in learning more about the Children and Youth Task Force, please do feel free to reach out to the Regional Emergency Management Specialist for your region. We also do have a short guidelines for development document designed for state and tribal leaders and community leaders who want to learn more about it and how to get one started. That's the link that's on your screen, or you can come to the ACF webpage and look for it, or write us if you need us to send you the link. And again, we do participate in the Federal Disaster Case Management Program, and under some conditions when we're activated by FEMA, we could also deploy case managers to help support community survivors getting connected to resources. If you wanted to learn more about the Disaster Case Management Program, the first point of contact for tribes for that is FEMA. I wanted to say just sort of some quick things about our approach when we work with tribes in disasters, our sort of working together strategy. I think just a few things. The first is we really do strive to practice cultural competence for the particular community that we're working with. For example, we have full-time tribal liaisons in some regions. We actively involve when there's a disaster that involves tribes. We try and work with whoever are the tribal program contacts that your tribe works with every day. As much as possible, we try and preserve existing relationships, not bring in a whole bunch of newcomers, but work through existing relationships with people that your ACF tribal grantees already know. We try not to take a one-size-fits-all approach. Those pre-existing relationships often do involve the ACF regional administrators who, in our agency, have the lead for government-to-government relationship with sovereign tribal nations and Alaska Native corporations. And we really do try and stay in our lane and focus on ACF's program areas. We can't always be the experts on other federal agencies' programs, be it FEMA or others, but we strive to really be there and dependably have the answers related to those programs that ACF supports and the ways that those programs can be used to help community members, especially children and youth. If you ever had a presidential declaration, you had to request ACF, I think the magic number to remember is 233. Prescriptive Mission Assignment 233 is the PSMA to get ACF help. If you want direct support to a grantee, contact that program's regional program office or the regional emergency management specialist. And if you wanted to talk about Children and Youth Task Force, please contact your regional emergency management specialist. If you don't know who these folks are, please write us at osepra@acf.ahs.gov. And thank you again to ANA for this opportunity to talk a little bit about ways that ACF would like to be helpful to you if it matches your tribe's strategy and your plans for how you wish to take care of the folks in your community. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and post the evaluation form. If you could consider filling that out for us and providing us some feedback. In the meantime, I'm going to monitor and see if there's any questions in the chat box. And we did get some comments, but they were mainly, Milo has left, I know, but some of the comments we've gotten are more how to get states to work with tribes. I'm not sure how we're going to, I mean, that's kind of a long-term issue that needs to be addressed. So I'm not sure that could be specifically resolved today. Do we have any other?
Anthony.
Oh, go ahead.
No, this is Dory. I think that's a great, I guess, question, because for tribal communities, you definitely want to involve the state. So how do you do that? And that might be something in the future. I know what we've done here in California, as well as some of the tribes and other areas, and I did see the comment about the disappointment in involving tribes in the Alaska Shield exercise. Anthony and I had both spoken about that, because in the state's plan it does mention that tribes will be consulted with or work with, but then after the first page there was nothing about how that actually would work. And I think if a group of tribes could approach the state, and maybe with some other agencies, federal agencies or other organizations, can help bring that discussion to the forefront, because tribes should have been included in that exercise, because there are so many tribes, sheer number-wise. The largest number of tribes in the United States are concentrated in Alaska. They should have been consulted, and there should have been ways to participate for tribes in that exercise. So I think maybe just drawing the state's attention to that, and maybe setting up some kind of formal discussion saying, hey, in the future, let's figure out how we can better or improve this relationship.
Thank you.
This is March from Galena. And, I attended the workshop that sort of went after that safe thing. That did come up. But one of the things that needs to be brought into is like the state and also FEMA working with tribes individually when they come out to communities that have first-class cities. Because that's one of the problems we had here in Galena, is that the state and FEMA came out on numerous occasions and just bypassed the tribes.
Thanks for that comment, March. Do we have any other questions out there? I appreciate everybody's patience. I realize we're quite a bit over our normal hour presentation here, so looking for maybe one or two other questions. Pamela, do you have a comment?
I'm not sure. It looks like you can hear me now.
Yes.
There were two things I think are good resources that people might be interested in. And March, I would encourage you to present something at the next Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. It will be in DC, September 2015. One of the issues that I've brought up, and others as well, is what do you do with these records? Our tribe did not have recognition for a long time because all the records were scattered. And that is one group that is very sympathetic to getting training out and to sharing stories of what works and what doesn't. And your presentation would fit very nicely in with the state of California, which does some really nice training in archives and preparedness. The other is the Institute of Museums, Libraries, and Museum Library Sciences, which has funding for Native American grants, the enhancement grant, as well as our earlier ANA ERE grant, paid for setting up a backup system for our tribal records, to find them, to get them scanned in, and then to figure out a way to get them a copy up the hill above tsunami level. And we relying on a cloud just will not work for governments that need to function right away. So I'd suggest those two things.
Pamela, those are great resources. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, we have a question. I don't know if Jonathan is still on, but there's a question about what are tribes or FEMA doing about child care during disasters? Parents need to take care of business, and it's difficult to carry around children during disaster. Anybody, Jonathan? Are you?
Yeah, this is Jonathan. Actually, in ACF, we are working very hard on the issue of child care disasters, and I will say this is an area, this is a really critical problem in every community, in Indian country and in non-Indian countries. This is actually a really formidable challenge, the challenge of child care and disasters. We've been working on this quite extensively. We really have sort of three primary areas we're working on now, including partnering with partners like FEMA and Save the Children. So three things we're working on. We're working on ways of using the Child Care and Development Fund that ACF administers as a way of promoting preparedness by communities to reconstitute child care after a disaster, and preparedness for child care providers. The second is we're really doing a lot of work on gap analysis to try and figure out what the federal government can do to better support child care recovery post-disaster. And I will say I think we recognize here in ACF this is a critical challenge area, and we see that as a lesson learned from a number of disasters. And the third is we're doing a lot of work to help to increase the involvement of child care and Head Start leadership in emergency planning at the community level, and to raise the awareness of the importance of early childhood programs like child care and Head Start for emergency managers. In the last year, we trained 248 child care and Head Start professionals nationwide in ACF as part of our plan to make to really promote ACF leadership on child care and Head Start in disasters. The whole country has a long way to go on this issue. We do have some resources on our website related for child care providers, for children, for families of children, and also for policymakers. And tribal leaders who are interested in working on this issue for their tribe, I definitely encourage you to reach out to us at the regional level, and we will look to connect you with some promising practices and some other ideas that may help based on experiences in other communities. But this is definitely a really critical area for everybody to be working on now, and will continue to be so.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you again to all of our presenters. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. This has been the Tribal Emergency Management webinar for the Administration for Native Americans. Please, if you haven't, complete the evaluation form, and this will be transcribed and posted to the regional and national ANA websites. And I also will send a follow-up email out with a PDF of the presentation and a couple of the templates that you could use as a starting point for COOP plans. With that, Goyana Chuknik from the Alaska region, and everybody take care. Bye.